There is a brand new schedule for the fourth round of stimulus checks. A brand new bill has been put forward in Congress, and this plan will provide millions of senior citizens with an extra $2,400 check each year. Seniors and other Social Security recipients in the US are being hit hard by inflation, which has outpaced increases in their benefits this year. And now some lawmakers have a plan to boost Social Security payments by $2,400 per recipient annually. The Social Security Expansion Act was introduced this week by Representative Peter DeFazio, a Democrat from Oregon, and Bernie Sanders, an independent from Vermont. The plan comes after SSA earlier this month said Americans will stop receiving their full Social Security benefits in roughly 13 years without actions to shore up the program. Social Security recipients will receive one cost of living adjustment each year, which is based on inflation and is supposed to keep their benefits in line with rising prices. But this year, beneficiaries are seeing their purchasing power wane as inflation overtakes their latest COLA increase of 5.9%. In May, it rose 8.6% from a year ago, a 4-decade high that pushed up the cost of food, shelter, and other staples. The new bill would seek to lessen the strain on people collecting Social Security by boosting each recipient's monthly check by $200, an annual increase of $2,400. Martha Sheehan, president of the National Association of Registered Social Security Analysts, said that many seniors rely on Social Security for the majority, if not all, of their income. $200 a month can make a significant difference for many people. The average monthly Social Security check is about $1,700, so a $200 increase will represent a 12% boost. The bill would also make several additional changes to the program, including butt-resting the program's funding by applying the Social Security payroll tax on all income above $250,000. And currently earnings above $147,000 are not subject to the Social Security tax. Although the bill would likely face obstacles in Congress, lawmakers are likely to take steps to shore up Social Security given the eventual shortfall, which will result in a cut to monthly benefits by about 20% starting in 2035. And now Bernie Sanders said that he would support a re-election bid by the president if he decides to run for another term. These comments come after one day after Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez decided to say whether she would endorse a Biden campaign in 2024. And asked if he would support the president in 2024, Sanders told CNN, "It's probably a little too early," before adding, "Biden will probably run again, and if he runs again, I will support him." Now, Bernie Sanders, who ran for the White House against Biden in 2020, also said he would not mount a primary challenge if Biden is running. The White House reiterated on Monday that Biden is planning to run in 2024. Now, the tweet came after Ocasio-Cortez would not say on Sunday if she would back Biden in the next presidential election if we were to run. AOC stated, "We'll cross that bridge when we get to it, but I think if the president has a vision, and that's something certainly we're all willing to entertain and examine when the time comes." A Morning Consult poll released last week showed 40% of Americans approve of Biden's job as president, compared to 42% prior. The president has also been juggling a handful of domestic inflation and international issues.
First Class Heath Robinson. It's about every American who's lost their lives to toxic exposures because of the duty that they have performed for this country. Sadly, it's too late to do right by Will and Heath and so many others, but today this body has a chance to do the right thing by their families and future generations of our all-volunteer military by passing the Sergeant First Class Heath Robinson honoring our family. The days of ignoring the rules from toxic exposure, wounds not seen until years after those days are gone, conditions like hypertension and MGUS found in veterans like Robert Hunter, a proud Montanan who served in the Army as an engineering officer during the Vietnam War. Robert was exposed to Agent Orange during his service and contracted MGUS years later. He's one of the 66,000 veterans in Montana that would become eligible for relief underneath this bill. Not to mention every post-9/11 veteran in this country who would automatically receive VA health care. This includes more than 3.5 million post-9/11 combat veterans exposed to burn pits in Iraq and Afghanistan. This bill would also remove the burden of proof for 23 presumptive conditions caused by military toxic exposures, from cancers to lung disease. And it would codify a more transparent framework to establish future presumptions of service connection to ensure future generations of veterans are treated more fairly. And the last, and probably most importantly, it will allow the VA to make the decisions on toxic exposures instead of an act of Congress. In short, the PACT Act will allow hundreds of thousands of veterans across the country to access to VA care that they have been denied and give them the benefits that they have been. Make no mistake, the VA will be given the tools it needs to hire more medical professionals, claims processors, establish more healthcare facilities, and improve claims processing, ensuring we're meeting the needs of our veterans today, tomorrow, and in the future. The bottom line is this country is very capable of recognizing the physical, obvious wounds of war, a lost limb, a chemical burn, and we're taking the steps to recognize the mental wounds of war. But we haven't been recognizing the toxic wounds of war, and that will end today with the passage of this bill. Chairman of the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee, and I've said this many times to the veteran service organizations, I take my cues from them, the veterans they represent.
Or at least downward forecasts from companies yet, and that we will surely see that when the next earnings season rolls around. And I'm wondering how you start to think about that, because if 16.5, it's the 20-year average PE, it's roughly the 10-year as well. And this year does not seem to be an average year when it comes to headwinds.
Yeah, so look, I fully agree that we're going to see downward earnings revisions. In fact, our earnings numbers for next year are 235 for the S&P. That's about 7% lower than the bottom-up consensus. But after a 24% decline in the market, I think investors are expecting at least some decline in earnings and don't really place a lot of stock in the estimates that are out there at this point. So I think investors are braced for it. Look, that doesn't mean that we couldn't see some, I mean, it certainly is a headwind for the market. That's part of the reason why we took our estimates down. But on trailing earnings, Melissa, you know, we're at 220 or so. That's in line with the long-term average that we're trading about 16, almost 16 and a half times trailing earnings. That is the long-term average since 1960.
What's your top pick for sectors, David, going into year end?
So we've had a pretty long-standing call on energy. It has been obviously the best performing sector this year. You know, I still think the outlook for energy looks pretty good, especially over time. There's no easy solution to these high energy, high oil prices. It's going to take time to get supply and demand back into balance. So, you know, I think that still makes sense. Look, obviously, if we have a recession, nothing's going to be immune, and energy will get hit also. But we also think it makes sense to balance that out with some defensive exposure, which is why we like healthcare, where valuations are still, I think, pretty reasonable relative to the market. Certainly, earnings will hold up much better than the market in a downturn.
Last year, I signed an executive order setting the goal of having 50% of all new cars and trucks sold by 2030 to be electric vehicles. Auto companies, unions, and the federal government are all working together to meet this goal. I signed into law the Inflation Reduction Act, the biggest investment in climate ever in all of history. It includes tax credits for up to $7,500 for folks to buy new electric vehicles or fuel cell vehicles made in America. And for the first time, you get a tax credit for buying a used electric vehicle. The Chips and Science Act that I signed into law is literally supercharging our efforts to make semiconductors, those small computer chips that power our everyday lives, including our vehicles here in America. And the infrastructure law is investing $7.5 billion to build electric vehicle charging stations all across America. So finding a place to charge up your vehicle is going to be as easy as pulling into a gas station. So earlier today, I talked about our efforts to keep gas prices down at the pump without delaying or deferring our transition to clean energy. Electric vehicles are part of that plan. And since I took office, electric vehicle sales have more than tripled. But with more electric vehicle sales, the demand for batteries and the critical minerals that go into those batteries has grown and is going to continue to grow. In fact, the demand for critical materials is set to skyrocket by 400% to 600% over the next several decades. The demand for minerals like lithium and graphite is expected to increase by as much as 4,000%. Some see a challenge, but we see an opportunity, a real opportunity, to shift to a net zero sum carbon world in one of the most significant economic transitions since the Industrial Revolution. That's not hyperbole, that's a fact. We're also confronting it head on with American ingenuity and American jobs. That's why my infrastructure law invested over $7 billion in battery supply chains that are going to bolster U.S. capacity for processing, manufacturing, and recycling critical minerals like lithium, nickel, and graphite. And that's why today I'm proud to announce $2.8 billion in awards to 20 companies represented on this screen across 12 states funded by the infrastructure law to build electric vehicles in a battery future here in America. Nearly 200 companies applied for these grants. Only 20 were selected, from Georgia to North Carolina to Nevada to the state of Washington. We have awarded this funding